Let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and your goodness towards us. We ask and pray that you would bless us, that you would direct our thoughts and our minds into the most holy place, where Jesus is now ministering and applying the benefits of his atonement. May we understand the words that we read this afternoon. Guide us and bless us, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. As I said, I want to look at chapter 23 from the Desire of Ages, which is the kingdom of God is at hand. But before we do that, I'm going to tackle something that I said that I would do a while ago, is to address this issue of the parable of the 10 virgins. Parable of the 10 virgins. So let's go to Matthew 25. It's only 13 verses, it's a very short parable, so we're going to read it together, and we're just going to draw out a couple of the highlights, a couple of the main points. Actually, I'm going to erase this, and before we read the parable, I just want to summarise what we learned earlier on. I'm going to read the paragraph straight, manuscript 136, 1897. I'm just going to read it and then I'm just going to comment this time. And many are doing the same thing today, in 1897, because they have not had experience in the testing messages comprehended in the first, second and third angels' messages. There are those who are searching the scriptures for proof that these messages are still in the future. They gather together the truthfulness of the messages, but they fail to give them their proper place in prophetic history. Therefore, such are in danger of misleading the people in regard to locating the messages. They do not see and understand the time of the end, or when to locate the messages. The day of God is coming with stealthy tread, but the supposed wise and great men are prating about higher education. They know not the signs of Christ's coming or of the end of the world.
True.
So we spoke in Sabbath school about, we understand that there are signs that Christ is about to return, but I'm suggesting, according to inspiration, the wise and great men of Adventism are prating around and they don't know what the signs are of Christ's soon return. So if you're looking to the world and you look into the activities of the papacy and you're seeing what he's doing, or you're seeing some wars or rumours of wars, or you're seeing a great earthquake or a tsunami, and you think these are the signs of Christ's imminent return, then you're fulfilling this history, because it says the wise men and the great men of Adventism can see all of that, but those signs that they're identifying, it says they know not the signs of Christ's coming or of the end of the world. So the signs that they're looking for aren't the ones that are identifying in a specific and key way the nearness of Christ's coming. So according to this passage that we read, where I'm saying that the everlasting gospel does not equal an experience only, which is what most people say. In 1897, she's identifying these men who are related to this issue of 1888, and she's saying because you weren't in the experience of these three angels, which were tests, which were historic prophetic events, you just think this is some experience, and you're pushing all of these things into the future. And the reason you're pushing it all into the future is because you don't know the time of the end, which is 1798. So in this history, what they're doing is, they're saying all that's going to happen in the future, because number one was fulfilled, number two, all you can have is the third angel's message is being fulfilled. And they're saying this isn't happening now, in their history, it's all in the future. So I hope that most of us are aware that in 1888, the first angel's message arrived in history. I don't know if we're aware of that, but if you go back and read inspiration, that's what's being taught. That in 1888, the angel of Revelation 18 came down and he was lighting the earth with his glory. This is when the latter rain begins to be poured out before the Sunday law. And because people don't understand about this history, they're saying, it's not going to happen now. We're not living in this time period. It's all a future event. Turn it all into an experience. And the reason why they're grappling with this issue is because they don't understand this event here, the time of the end. Because if you understood the time of the end, you would know that you've entered into the everlasting gospel and the three-step testing process has begun. Wouldn't you? Yeah? Because you know, if you went back to the history, that here is the time of the end, and you're going to get a 1, a 2, and a 3. And because they don't know this, they reject this, they lose sight of all of this, and they push all of these events or fulfillment of prophecy into the future. And I'm contending that's exactly what's happening today in God's church. It's exactly what's happening again in God's church. The God's church today don't understand how 1888 is going to be fulfilled at the end of the world. They're pushing all the events into the future. And the reason they're doing all of that is because they don't understand when the time of the end is occurring at the end of the world. They don't understand what the time of the end of the world. So if you understood this, you'd be able to locate all of these in history. You'd be able to address all of these issues, and you wouldn't be pushing things out in the future. That's why we're looking at this quote. So let's go to Matthew 25, and let's read Matthew 25. As we read Matthew 25, we're going to look at 4 events in the parable. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. Before we read on, there's an association, there's a continuation from chapter 24 and chapter 25. We mentioned about Luke 21 this morning in our Sabbath school class, and I said that Luke 21, Matthew 24 and Mark 13 are all the same prophecy. And they all lead you from the time of Christ right down to the end of the world. And when chapter 24 finishes, Christ says, then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins. So when it says then, what time are we living in when it says, or is he referring to when it says then? Ellen White, when she comments on this parable, she says when Christ says then, he's brought his people to the end of the world. So when it says then, it's saying at the end of the world, this is what God's kingdom is going to be like. At the end of the world. So at the end of the world, what's his kingdom going to be like? The parable of the 10 virgins. So I believe it's in great controversy where she makes this little comment. An important observation to make is that Matthew 24 takes you from the time of Christ, the destruction of Jerusalem, all the way to the end of the world. And then it says, then the kingdom of heaven is going to be like 10 virgins at the end of the world. The kingdom of heaven isn't like 10 virgins in the time of Christ, or in the Middle Ages, or in the Reformation time period. It's at the end of the world. And when does the end of the world begin? At the time of the end. We rubbed it out here. It was just here. It says at the time of the end. Time of the end is talking about the end of the world. So that's where we're picking up this time of the end. So at the time of the end, at the end of the world, this is what God's church is going to be looking like. Not his church, his kingdom. But you can say his church if you like. So does everybody see that? We've tied up this statement that we read a moment ago, which was dealing with the time of the end, and these people who are objecting to the time of the end because they don't see it, they don't understand what it means. And what you end up doing is, you get the everlasting gospel, disassociate it from historical events, and push it into the future. So if we were going to talk about ourselves, and we were doing this very thing in 2015, like they were doing in 1897, we'd say this, that the third angel's message is justification by faith in verity only. And we know there's going to be a Sunday law, but it's not here now. And the signs that are all around us are saying Christ is about to come sometime in the future. The third angel's message is going to be empowered sometime in the future. All we understand about it now is an experience. And why are we doing all of that? Because we don't understand what? What is it that we don't understand? What the time of the end is. If you don't understand what the time of the end is, you're going to be repeating this history. But Ellen White says, Matthew 25, then, at the end of the world, the time of the end, this is what the kingdom of heaven is going to be like. Does everybody understand that? Yes? Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. So we just want to stop there. There are 10 virgins, it says. And what are they doing?
Preparing to meet the bridegroom.
Okay, so they're preparing, it says, went forth to meet the bridegroom. So the first thing we're going to see is that they went forth. Ellen White was commenting on a history about the first, second and third angel's message, which people in 1897 hadn't experienced. She was referring back to the Millerite history. And we're going to read in a minute where she says that was the parable of the 10 virgins. So what we're going to see is those events, the first, second and third angel's messages, are going to be tied and locked into this parable of the 10 virgins, because that's what the kingdom of heaven or the church is going to look like at the end of the world. It's going to be modelled on this parable. So this parable is a prophetic story of what the church is going to look like at the end of the world, or the time of the end, which is the same thing. It's different ways of saying the same thing. So the first thing we're going to identify is went forth. And if we're going to be in agreement with this statement, that it says, those were searching the scriptures for proof that these messages in the future, they gathered together the truthfulness of the messages, but they failed to give them their proper place in prophetic history. What we're going to do now is we're going to give went forth and the other three, and we're going to give them their proper place in history. We're going to put a date, an event, but this isn't normal history, this is prophetic or sacred history. So do we see what we're going to be doing? We're going to be taking this parable and we're going to be overlaying it onto a history that the Millerites went through, which is prophetic history, which is what we're required to do. Verse 2, and 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. So you've got 5 wise and you've got 5 foolish. If you're familiar with Daniel chapter 12, you can know that it talks about the wise in Daniel chapter 12. Who are the opposite people of the wise in Daniel chapter 12? What word does it use for them? Wicked. Wicked. So we know that the foolish are wicked. The foolish people are wicked. I'm not going to prove it now, but we have done it already in some of our previous studies. The foolish are also Laodicean. They're also the stony ground hearers, and they're also Pharisees. So, according to inspiration, the Laodiceans are wicked. Yeah, Laodiceans are wicked. But we think, if I say a statement like that, am I trying to say that these are wicked people because they're doing some bad sin at home? Something on the internet, or they're eating something bad? The wickedness is not related to any kind of personal sin that you're doing. In the context of Daniel chapter 12, what is the wickedness to do with? It's a misunderstanding of the word. Because the wise are running to and fro and they're understanding what's going on, but the wicked aren't doing that. So it's not some kind of identification of who is righteous and who is unrighteous. Who's wearing long dresses and who's wearing or what you're eating or anything like that. This is an issue of an understanding of the Word of God which makes you wicked, and that's what the foolish are. If we're going to imprint this parable over the Millerite history, which is what we're going to be doing, and hopefully we can see that we have legitimacy to do that, we know that the parable of the 10 virgins, if it's the everlasting gospel according to Revelation 14, which it is, then Revelation 14, or let me put it this way, the parable of the 10 virgins is a story about the everlasting gospel. Would we see that? The parable of the 10 virgins is a story about the everlasting gospel. And how many groups are there in the parable of the 10 virgins? There are 2 groups. So straight away you know, when you deal with the everlasting gospel, and the product of the everlasting gospel. So for instance, if you had a machine here, and this machine is the everlasting gospel, and you put something into this machine, what are you going to get out? You put something into this machine, and when it comes out the everlasting gospel, you're going to get 2 things coming out. You're going to get a wise, and you're going to get a foolish. So the everlasting gospel is the work of Christ. Can we all agree with that? It's the work of Christ. In developing and then demonstrating 2 classes of people, the wise and the foolish, based upon a prophetic testing message. The prophetic testing message is 1, 2, 3, Revelation 14. Or you can go to Revelation 18, it works the same. You've got a group of people who are going to go into this machine, which is the everlasting gospel, and it's going to churn out 2 groups. It's going to churn out a wise and a foolish group. So when we think the everlasting gospel is just an experience about the good news of Christ, and all you're going to get out of that are good people coming out, you know that cannot be correct. Even without understanding all of this, if you go to Revelation 14, verse 8, it tells you what the product of the everlasting gospel is in that verse. Babylon is fallen. So you know there are bad people being produced when the everlasting gospel comes to them. They're Cain. This is Cain and this is Abel. Both products of the everlasting gospel.
Would you say drunk and, they're drunk as well? As it says in Isaiah chapter 2.
So you can use new wine if you want to hear, and these people are drunk. If you want to use that imagery. Verse 4, but the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made. So let's go back to verse 5. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. So we're going to see a tarrying time here. And when the tarrying time comes, they all sleep. If you want to see Ellen White's commentary on this, when it says they all sleep, both the wise and the wicked sleep, she says the sleep of the wise is different to the sleep of the foolish. This is a sleep of indifference, and this is a sleep of watching and waiting. It's a different kind of a sleep. At midnight, there was a cry made. So there's a midnight cry. Then all those virgins, every single one of them, arose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, not so, lest there not be enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And when they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. So there's a shut door. Afterwards came also the other virgins, the foolish, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. And he answered and said, verily I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore, so now the parable's finished, and now there's an admonition. Watch therefore, for you know neither the hour, the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. So these are the four events of this parable. And we're going to hopefully demonstrate that this parable was fulfilled in Millerite history. So in Millerite history, which runs from 1798 going on to 1840 August, going on to April 1844, going on to August 1844, and into October 1844. And we're going to get these four events and we're going to map them over this history, because this is the everlasting gospel as we just identified, and we're going to see that the parable of the 10 virgins was fulfilled in this history. So let's read the statement that addresses this issue. We're going to read it a couple of times because I want to make different points as we go along. This is Review and Herald, August 19th, 1890, paragraph 3. She begins, when the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation and it becomes an abiding influence. I'm going to read the passage, but I'm going to just identify the issue, the point where it says, this parable was fulfilled in this history. And we're going to have to reread it to pick up other bits and pieces. It must be attended with divine power, it will accomplish nothing. I am often referred to the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom were wise and 5 foolish. This parable has been and will be fulfilled to the very letter, for it has a special application to this time, and like the third angel's message, has been fulfilled and will continue to be present true till the close of time. In the parable, the 10 virgins had lamps, but only 5 of them had the saving oil with which to keep their lamps burning. This represents the condition of the church. The wise and the foolish have their Bibles and are provided with all the means of grace, but many do not appreciate the fact that they must have the heavenly unction. They do not heed the invitation, come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So, let's just quickly go back over this. I want to draw out the point to show that this is this history. First of all, it says, I am often referred to the parable of the 10 virgins, 5 of whom were wise and 5 foolish. This parable has been, I'm going to skip the next bit, it says will be, has been fulfilled to the very letter. So in 1890, has this parable been fulfilled to the very letter? It has been. We've already identified, in Matthew 25 verse 1 it says, then, at the end of the world, then the kingdom of heaven is going to be like this. So this then is picking up from this point right here. It's picking up from this point right here. This is the then. Then the kingdom of heaven, then God's church is going to be like a parable of the 10 virgins. This parable has been and will be fulfilled to the very letter, but it's a special application to this time. Which time? From the time of the end onward, it's going to have special application to this time. Then she says this, and like the third angel's message has been fulfilled and will continue to be present truth till the close of time. So she's relating the parable to the third angel's message. The third angel's message has been fulfilled. When was the third angel's message fulfilled? Here. So the third was fulfilled here. And it says, as the third angel's message is present truth, so this parable is going to be present truth because it's in the time period of the third angel. In the parable, the 10 virgins had lamps, but only 5 of them had the saving oil with which to keep their lamps burning. This represents the condition of the church. The wise and the foolish have their Bibles and are provided with the means of grace. Let's just see if I want to read any of that more. No. Okay, so we'll leave that there. So what we've identified so far is that the date begins in 1798 at the time of the end, that this parable is connected to the third angel, and it's also connected to when it begins. So we've made a connection between these events and these events here. So let's read some more. If we read Great Controversy 393, Great Controversy 393 says, the coming of Christ as announced by the first angel's message. So I'm identifying this as the first angel's message, and this also is the first angel's message. This is the second angel's message. This is the midnight cry, and this is the third angel's message. Now, all of this information here you can glean out of Spirit of Prophecy, and the dates as well. You can glean these dates from either Spirit of Prophecy or the Pioneer writings, those historical dates, and they attach these events to all of them. So I'm not making any of those up. They're not my assumption, but I'm not giving all the proof text on these things. But you can identify those events with those dates. The coming of Christ as announced by the first angel's message. So there's the first angel's message here and here, because these two events are connected. The coming of Christ announced by the first angel's message was understood to be represented by the coming of the bridegroom. The widespread reformation under proclamation of his soon coming answered to the going forth of the virgins. So what is she saying there? Went forth, the going forth of the virgins. She's quoting the parable now. The going forth, the went forth of the virgins, it says it answers to this. The coming of Christ as announced by the first angel's message was understood to be represented by the coming of the bridegroom. So the bridegroom is coming, and that's what this first angel's message is. They're telling you the bridegroom's coming. First angel's message. Then it says, the widespread reformation under the proclamation of his soon coming answered to the going forth of the virgins. So, these events here are number one, right here. You can show from Spirit of Prophecy that the first angel's message arrived in 1798, that August the 11th, 1840 is its empowerment. This is Revelation 10. And then why Anurisis identified Revelation 10 as the first angel's message. So this first angel's message, which does a two-step work, answers to number one, the going forth of the virgins, because the bridegroom's about to come. So is everybody happy with that? Are you happy, Gary? You've got a question?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No, you ask. Go ahead.
Just a clarification, really. There was no church in 1798, not the Advent Church. So how was the first angel's message proclaimed in 1798?
Thomas.
He said it arrived, but it wasn't empowered until later on. So God had to gather people later on, it arrived.
So it arrived in 1798.
It arrived in 1798, and it was empowered in 1840. What, this one or this one?
The first one, 1798. It's because people became more aware of it in 1798.
Because in 1798, if we go to Revelation 2 and 3, the fourth church, Thyatira, comes to its end. Because the deadly wound is now inflicted upon the papacy. Amen. And God's people are free to come out of Babylon. The papacy is a representation of Babylon. Now they're free to come out of that.
The first angel's message doesn't talk about the fall of Babylon. That's the second angel's message, isn't it? First angel's message is fear God and give glory to him.
Yes. But they can't give that message because they don't even have any Bibles up to this day. If you read Great Controversy, there's a widespread reformation that begins from 1798, because God's people can come out of Babylon. What's the church after Thyatira? No. No. Deadly wound. What saying it is? Sardis.
Some people say it means remnant. Ardis means...
Okay, Sardis means to come out. It's the church that comes out. It's the church that has come out of the Dark Ages. It's the church that's come out of papal persecution. Are you struggling that 1798 is when the first angel's message arrives?
You need to show me a spirit prophecy quote on that one.
Great Controversy talks about it. William Miller, he received a light from...
And that wasn't 1798, was it?
Well, he started studying. He was studying it. He was having a personal Bible study, and that's when God revealed it.
Great Controversy 356.
1798.
No,
GC 356.
no such message has ever been in the past ages. All as we have seen did not preach it. He pointed his brethren into the far distant future for the coming of the Lord. The reformers did not proclaim it. Martin Luther placed a judgment about 300 years in the future from his days. But since 1798, the book of Daniel has been unsealed. Knowledge of the prophecies has increased, and many have proclaimed the solemn message of the judgment near. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. So I'm identifying that the first angel message arrived in 1798, gets empowered in 1840, and this answers to the going forth of the virgins. If you are not happy with that, would you be happy with just with that?
Yeah.
I don't mind you raising that, but I think he's given the proof text for it. But even if you wanted to ignore that, do you accept that 1798 is the time of the end? Do you accept that? Yeah. So I can still put 1798 there. And then you're going to say that the first angel's message arrives here. Yeah?
Yeah, because that quote you read there does the same thing about Revelation. The first angel's message talks about the books of Daniel.
Do you want to read the passage again?
Revelation 13.
Yeah.
If I heard correctly, just said it a little bit.
Yeah, so let's just read it again. Maybe.
What's the reference?
GC 357.1. No such message has ever been given in past ages. All as we have seen did not preach it. He pointed his burden into the far distant future for the coming of the Lord. The reformers did not proclaim it. Martin Luther placed a judgment about 300 years in the future from his day. But since 1798, the book of Daniel has been unsealed. Knowledge of the prophecies has increased, and many have proclaimed the solemn message of the judgment near.
Okay, so what's the solemn message of the judgment near? Where do you see that?
2,300 day prophecy.
No, the solemn message of the judgment is near. 2,300 days is a long way away. You go back to Daniel chapter 8 and you see the dialogue into chapter 9 that he has with Gabriel. He says, I thought we're at the end of the 70 years. Now you're pushing it out to 2,300. That's in the future. Where do you see a statement that the judgment is near? Let's go to Revelation 14, verse 6. Because the hour of his judgment is come. So the only message that you're going to see in Scripture that talks about the hour of his judgment being near is a new message that no one can give until 1798.
But in the same token, you could say, because William Miller based the judgment on that 2,300 day prophecy.
Of course, but to make that assessment,
He didn't base it on the first angel's message.
he certainly did. He's not basing all of his theology on Daniel 8:14. He understands about Revelation 14. He understands that the hour of his judgment is near. And even if he didn't, which I think you can show that he did, Ellen White's commenting on what the truth of this issue is. So the truth of the issue is, you can't have a message before 1798. So she's identifying the date, then she's identifying the specific message happens at that day when the book of Daniel is unsealed. And when is the book of Daniel unsealed?
1798.
It's 1798, because it says, what does it say? It's going to be unsealed at the time of the end. So this is where his book is unsealed. So what was sealed up in Daniel's book? What information is being sealed up? So this side is sealed, and this is unsealed. What was it that was sealed before this? Daniel 8:14. So 8:14 is sealed, and now 8:14 is unsealed. And it's talking about what? That the judgment is about to come, which is the same story as Revelation 14 verse 6. The hour of his judgment has come, the first angel's message. You couldn't have a message about the close coming of the judgment, because it's now close. Because when Daniel had it, it was far. When Luther had it, it was far. It says all of those people, Paul, Luther and Daniel, it's far from all them. But when you get to here, now it's come. Now the hour of his judgment has come, and it's near, so you can. That's why you're identifying the first angel's message with that event. Because the first angel's message says, the hour of his judgment has come. The information that's been unsealed here is the issue on time, because now they're understanding day for year. And so now, from this point on, they're able to understand what it's all about. Does it all work out on that day? No. There has to be an increase of knowledge. We know that. In the time of Moses, their time at the end is when Moses is born. That's why his mother saves him, because she knows he's a goodly child, a child of God. There's awareness that's going on. But things aren't going to happen for a long time, because there has to be an increase of knowledge. Everybody knows something's happening, but nobody knows what to do with the information. So everybody knows there's something happening after the deadly wound. Everybody knows it's a prophecy, but nobody knows what's going to happen, so there has to be an increase of knowledge. And by the time you get to 1840, knowledge has increased significantly now, and everybody's aware of what's going on. And so this message empowers this message.
Well, John Wesley identified after 1798, he said another power was supposed to be coming up. He never knew it was America, but judging by the prophecies, he said that after 1798, another power was supposed to come upon the scene.
Yeah, he says that before 1798.
Yeah.
And I think the passage that he just read, Martin Luther had the same. He says it's going to happen in 300 years. If you calculate 300 years from when he said the statement, it's about the right time. So there's some level of understanding, but they're not saying the hour of his judgment is near. Now we're in this time. Now we're in the final movements. None of them, they're all predicted somewhere in the future. Paul says the same thing. Paul says that don't let any man deceive you, that this cannot happen until the man of sin is revealed. The man of sin is revealed in 538, which is 1,500 years after Paul made that statement. He says Christ can't come for 1,500 years until the man of sin is revealed. Sorry, not 1.5, 500 years. 500 years, not 1.5. 500 years. And then it's another 1260 on top of that before the deadly wounds delivered, before Christ can come.
She just says here, a great religious awakening is foretold in the first angel's message, Revelation 14.
So, I think you can demonstrate the first angel's message arrives here, but even if you don't, you can see that it was empowered here.
Does it make a difference?
Does what make a difference?
Whether it came first and then was empowered, or does it have to? Is there some significance with that, or can it just be that it arrived in 1840 and that was?
Because you have to mark the time of the end. 1840 isn't the time of the end. 1798 is the time of the end. And in 1798, lots of things happened. And one of the things happened, there's a great religious awakening that happens.
So you're applying the everlasting gospel message to starting in 1798. 78.
Because no other message could have been given before that. That's what Thomas just read.
So, is it because it kind of has to start there, or is it because it starts there? Does that make sense? Because 1798 is the time of day which is established, and we all know that. Because that's a fact. Because we also know that there's something called everlasting gospel, and the first one is the first name of message. You kind of have to put it at that time, or is it at that time because it is the everlasting gospel?
Both. I think it's both. It couldn't have been given before.
Prove it more so from 1840. And is that why you say it's empowered at that time? Because are any of the others empowered?
Yeah? Let's go with this. If the first angel message arrives here, what's it based upon? What principle?
Just because it's a time of the end. That's what I'm thinking about.
2300 days is now going to be unsealed. How do you unseal the 2300 days? What's the unsealing? What's the new light that comes on it?
That the sign was taken out.
No, everybody knew that because you could read it, but nobody could decipher what 814 meant. So the way you decipher it is by saying the day equals a year. Now the prophecy makes sense. So they come up with day for a year. This truth, this light comes out because it's a message based upon time. That Ellen White says the unsealing of the book of Daniel was the unsealing of time. So here it arrives, and you've only got one testimony to prove this thing. You've got a quote.
No, but someone probably say that Ardis means a remnant shall escape. So
Yeah. That's what I said.
Transition time.
Yeah. So you've only got testimony of one. So you need a second testimony, which is why I'm calling that one empowered, because here, 2 years ahead of this, in 1838, Josiah Litch predicts, based upon this rule, that radical Islam is going to be restrained and the Ottoman Empire is going to fall. So he bases here a prediction based upon this principle. So once that happens, then you know day for the year is proved, and here, day for the year was a theory. You can't prove it upon the testimony one. That's why this is the empowerment of this message, because they're both using the same principle. Sorry?
So what it's saying for the rest of the angels. So the second angel message, you've got the theory and arrival, then you've got the event, and the third one as well. There's got to be two for, you've got one for the first angel's message, two. So you should have two for the second angel's message, you should have two for the third angel's message.
So we're going to write 2 arrival, 2 empowered, and 3 arrival. Because the third angel's message was never empowered in Millerite history. Millerite history stops here when the third angel message arrives. The third angel's message wasn't empowered in that history, because its empowerment is seen in Revelation 18. That's when its empowerment happened. So the empowerment of the third angel is going to happen in the future event.
So just one more clarification. In 1838, Josiah Litch, and he had that prediction with the Ottoman Empire. What's going to be our version for today? You said Millerite history repeats, so surely there's going to be another event which is going to empower the Advent movement.
There's lots of them.
It can't be. It has to be one. It has to be parallel.
If you want to go just for that specific one, yeah, because there's other truth.
The one that brought great impetus to the Advent movement. So what's going to be what's its parallel to today's movement? What's going to be
The same thing. The same thing.
So Islam what? What's Islam going to do? They're going to have to be restrained, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes. Sorry?
Says it doesn't make sense.
There's putting a number 1 here, which is this number 1. Does it make sense to put it here in this history? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's just leave the bits and pieces that make sense, and the bits that don't make sense. Okay, so what I'm saying, the bits that don't make sense, maybe I'm wrong on that, but let's do... I haven't done that, because Gary is eliciting a response from me to predict it, and I'm saying, well, let's just see what happened in their history first. That's what I'm saying. Because when I do that, you can see that it makes sense. So, let's go to number 2. We're going to read Early Writings 247. Early Writings 247. The disappointed ones saw from the scriptures that they were in the tarrying time, and that they must patiently wait the fulfillment of the vision. The same evidence which led them to look for their Lord in 1843 led them to expect him in 1844. I'll read it again. The disappointed ones saw from the scripture that they were in the tarrying time. So somewhere in this history now they're in the tarrying time, which is here, the tarrying time. And they must patiently wait the fulfillment of the vision. What's the vision that they're referring to? Go with Habakkuk chapter 2, Ezekiel chapter 12, or the 2300 days. They wait for that vision to be fulfilled. The same evidence which led them to look for their Lord in 1843 led them to expect him in 1844. So to give you the logic behind that, this is 1843, and this is 1844. When did they think Christ is going to come? In this time period. Yeah? So when you get to here, this is the end, and this is the beginning. The end of 1843 leads you to the beginning of 1844. And they thought, he's going to come here, but he actually ends up coming here. And it says the same evidence that they thought was going to work here is the same evidence that they used to be here. So when are they disappointed? They're disappointed right here. This is day 365, for want of a better way of saying it, the end of the year, and this is day 1, the next year, New Year's Day. So when you get to New Year's Day, now they're disappointed. So we just have to see, where is this event in here? And this event here is right here. This is the tarrying time. So the reason for that is, we work on Gregorian or Roman time. Yeah? That we go from January to January. And the Jews, the Israelites, went from spring to spring. They went from spring to spring. The Millerites understood this, and when the Millerites were talking about 1843, they're saying this. They're saying the spring of 1843 to the spring of 1844 to the spring of 1845. So if I redraw that out, ours goes from January to December to January to December. So that's our 43 and 44. But the Jews would look at it this way. Their 43 would look like this, and their 44 would look like this. And this is the spring, and this is winter. Does everybody understand, can see that? So when they talk about the end of 43, they're talking about the spring of 44. So this is the spring of 44. Without going into the complexities of how they get it to April or the details of it, this is where their tarrying time is. So number 2 is right here. Does that make sense? Near the close of the second angel's message, I've got the second angel's message, because right here in this tarrying time, there's another statement that she says that in this time period here, they start quoting Revelation 14, verse 8, which is Babylon is fallen. She says that the Protestant churches have fallen because of the issue and the argument that they're having with the Millerites. There's a warfare going on now, and they identify that Babylon is fallen. It's not a complete fall. Revelation, the second age message was only partially or incompletely fulfilled. It wasn't a complete fulfillment of it. So we know that this Revelation 14 verse 8 is in this time period here, and it's the second angel's message, and then she says this: near the close of the second angel's message, I saw a great light from heaven shining upon the people of God. The rays of this light seemed bright as the sun, and I heard the voices of angels crying, behold, the bridegroom cometh. Right here. Oh, let me give you the early writings 2. I don't think I gave it to you. 238. Early writings 238. Near the close of the second angel's message, I saw a great light from heaven shining upon the people of God. The rays of this light seemed bright as the sun, and I heard voices of angels crying, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. This was the midnight cry, which was to give power to the second angel's message. Arrival and empowerment. Angels were sent from heaven to arouse the discouraged saints and prepare them for the great work before them, the work of the third angel. The most talented men were not the first to receive this message. Angels were sent to the humble, devoted ones and constrained them to raise the cry, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. And you can see in other passages where she talks about that. This is the midnight cry. It says it there. It's the empowerment of the second. She talks in other places about angels coming down, which we've just alluded to here. And this happens in August 1844 at the Exeter Camp meeting. So this is number 3. And the last one is Great Controversy. Great Controversy 427, I think it is. 427. The proclamation, behold the bridegroom cometh, in the summer of 1844, just here, led thousands to expect the immediate advent of the Lord. At the appointed time the bridegroom came, not to the earth, as the people expected, but to the Ancient of Days in heaven, Daniel chapter 7, and to the marriage, the reception of his kingdom. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Number 3. Sorry, number 4. Shut door. The angel's message. So what I've done is, I've laid out the parable of the 10 virgins and laid it out over Millerite history. So can we see that the parable of the 10 virgins was perfectly fulfilled in this history? Not some experience that people are having. Not some experience that they're having. They're going through events. These are historical events which are prophetic things that are going on. So the parable of the 10 virgins is a prophetic story of the church at the end of the world, when the end of the world happens, which is 1798. Does that make sense? Okay. We know in Millerite history the number of things we know, yes? That the parable of the 10 virgins was fulfilled to the very letter. So I want to read another passage now. This is 1 MR 99.2. 1 MR 99.2. I think it's this one. The mighty angel who instructed John, this is Daniel, Revelation chapter 10, was no less a personage than Jesus Christ, setting his right foot on the sea and his left foot upon the dry land, showing the part which he is acting in the closing scenes of the great controversy with Satan. This position denotes his supreme power and authority over the whole earth. The controversy has waxed stronger and more determined from age to age, and will continue to do so, to the concluding scenes, when the masterly work of the powers of darkness shall reach their height. Satan, united with evil men, will deceive the whole world, and the churches who receive not the love of the truth, full stop. But the mighty angel demands attention. He cries with a loud voice. He is to show the power and authority of his voice to those who have united with Satan to oppose the truth. After these things, 7 thunders uttered their voices. So on top of these events here, you can lay out over this history, 7 thunders. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. After these things, 7 thunders uttered their voices. The injunction comes to John as to Daniel in regard to the little book. Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered. So now she's going to tell what they are. These relate to future events which will be disclosed in their order. Daniel shall stand in his lot at the end of the days. John sees the little book unsealed. Then Daniel's prophecies have their proper place in the first, second, and third angel's messages to be given to the world. The unsealing of the little book was the message in relation to time. So let me just read another statement. We're going to read from manuscript 59, 1900. It's a very similar passage to this one. After these, 7 thunders uttered their voices. The injunction comes to John as to Daniel in regard to the little book. Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered. These relate to future events which will be disclosed in their order. So it says the 7 thunders equals future events. Then I'll read on. Daniel shall stand in his lot at the end of the days. John sees the little book unsealed. Then Daniel's prophecies have their proper place in the first, second, and third angel's messages. So these 7 thunders are mapped over the first, second, and third angel's message. The books of Daniel and Revelation are one. One is a prophecy, the other a revelation. One a book sealed, the other book opened. John heard the mysteries which the thunders uttered, but he was commanded not to write them. The special light given to John, which was expressed in the 7 thunders, was a delineation of events which would transpire under the first and second angel's messages. So these 7 thunders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, were fulfilled in Millerite history under the first and second angel's messages, because this is the first and then this is the second, and that's when Millerite history ends, at the end of the second, where the third begins. So these 7 thunders are a delineation of events that occurred in this history between the first and the second angel's messages, because here is a shut door. And the other word that we use for shut door is close of probation. It closes at the third way mark, at number 3. And then she also says it was a delineation of events that was under the first and second angel's messages, first angel's message, second angel's messages, and they're also relating to future events. So they were fulfilled here, and they're going to be fulfilled in the future. So the 7 thunders are going to be fulfilled in the future. So what those 7 events are, they're going to be fulfilled in the future, but they're attached or connected to the first and second angel's messages. So you know the first and second angel's messages are going to be brought into the future. They're going to come into history. When they come into history, again at the end of the world, you can't make them just an experience. They have to be attached to historical events like they have in the past. That's the error that she mentions in 1897. We're going to read the passage again that we read before. Review and Herald, August 19, 1890. When the third angel's message is preached as it should be, power attends its proclamation. When it's the third angel's message, it came into history here. When it's the third empowered, where do we mark the empowerment of the third in Scripture? Revelation 18. So its empowerment is going to be here. So this is now Revelation 18. So you can't read the statement that we read about Review and Herald without factoring in the empowerment of the third angel. So if you're familiar with Revelation 18, which we call the fourth angel, because you've got a 3 and 1 combination, what's it talking about? There's the angel that comes down, lightens the earth with its glory, and then it says what? Babylon is fallen. Okay? So where do you get the terminology Babylon is fallen? You get it from right here in Revelation 14, verse 8. So here, you've got a second angel's message in this history, don't we? Yeah? Then verse 4 says, come out of her, my people. And when are we going to be telling people to come out of Babylon? At the Sunday law, is it not? So then you've got a third angel's message here. All of this is to do with the empowerment of the third angel. It's arrived here, it's running through history. This is the third angel's message. And then this fourth angel is going to come down to join it. And when it joins it, it's going to do it in a progressive step. You've got the number 2, it says it. You know number 3 is under the loud cry. And if you've got a 2 and a 3, the everlasting gospel, you've got to have a 1. So you've also got the first angel's message. The first angel's message is Revelation 18:1. The second one is Revelation 18 verses 2 and 3. And the third angel is Revelation 4. When you see the characteristics of this angel, you can show that it's following the same characteristics as this angel. So you know that when it comes down to lighting the earth with its glory, it's pointing you back to this one, which was the number 1. So you know, if you've got a 2, you've got to have a 1 and a 3 attached to it. You can't have a second angel without a first. Once you've got first and second, you have to have a third. So when the third angel's message is empowered, as we know it to be Revelation 18, it's going to come as a 3-step testing process. And I'm contending that we're in that history now, and what we're doing is, because we don't know anything about these, we're making all of this thing in the future. We're making it all in the future. And this angel here is marked by this event here. There's 2 things that are connected with it when I shed the arrival and the empowerment. So I'm going to put this back, 1 arrival, and I'm going to call this 1 empowered. And this happens in 1798. And the classic verse to show that is Daniel 11 verse 40. In Daniel 11 verse 40, it says the king of the north and the king of the south are going to have a fight. And the king of the south is Egypt. And if you go to Revelation chapter 11, there's a city, a great city. And who is that city? France. And it identifies it as one of the characteristics, one of its powers is Egypt. So there's going to be a fight between Egypt and the king of the north. The king of the north is Babylon. These are figures. This is France, and this is the papacy. At the time of the end, France and the papacy are going to have a fight, and the papacy is going to lose, and France is going to win. In the same verse, it says at the time of the end, they're going to have another fight. It calls it the time of the end, but this time you've got the papacy who's going to come and fight against the king of the south again, but now the king of the south is not France, it's the USSR. And it's identifying that both of these times happen at the time of the end. And the time of the end is linked with the first angel's message. If you go to Revelation 18, the first angel's message is identified in verse 1. So you know that this is the time of the end. This is the time of the end because Daniel chapter 11 verse 40 tells you there's this struggle between the king of the south and the king of the north. First, the king of the south beats the king of the north, then the king of the north beats the king of the south.
That's what you get 1989.
And this event happens in 1989. And if we disagree with that, then we'd have to explain when was this fulfilled and when was this fulfilled.
No, that's an actual event.
But some people wouldn't identify it in verse 40. But if you identify it in verse 40, the verse says at the time of the end. So 1989 must be the time of the end. Just as 1798 must be the time of the end, because that's what the verse teaches. I'm not adding anything to it, I'm just saying it, reading it as it says.
From 1989 then, you were back in the first angel's message.
From 1989, the third angel's message, this one here, which was running through history, is now going to be empowered. And it's empowered by the angel of Revelation 18. We know that that's standard Adventist understanding. The fourth comes down and empowers the third. But what we don't understand as Adventist typical understanding is when it comes down, we think it's going to come down in one lump, and in 2015 it comes down future to 2015. In the future, we're putting it into the future. And she said, why do we put it into the future? Because we don't understand what? The time of the end. So if you don't understand this as being the time of the end, and you don't understand this as being the time of the end, when you come to the end of the world, you won't understand when the time of the end is going to come. And if you do that, in the time period of 2015, you're going to put the work of this angel, the fourth angel, into the future. And when you do that, you're going to mislead people.
If the time of the end is 1798 was the first angel's message, and the time of the end was again in 1989, shouldn't that be the first angel's message going forth from 1989?
Exactly right. I'm going to put 1989 here. I'm not going to put it here, because I'm going to get squashed up. I'm going to put it here. So I'm going here, and I'm saying this. All of this, all of this is Revelation 18. And Revelation 18, this is not an inspired statement, is the fourth angel. That's what Revelation 18 is. The fourth, Ellen White, you can't find inspiration in the term fourth angel, but we understand because we say there's 1, 2, 3 and another one joins it. So Revelation 18 is the fourth angel. All of this is the fourth angel. And if we don't understand in the time period of the fourth angel where the time of the end is, we're going to push it all into the future and just make it the third angel. We're just going to push it into the future. But we can demonstrate that Revelation 18 comes in 3 steps, because you know this is not the third angel. The wording is the second angel. And we know that this is the word of the second angel. And have we got Sunday law yet? We don't. But if you go to Revelation 14, verses 9 to 11, you know that the wording of Revelation 14, verses 9 to 11, 9:11, tells you that here, the third angel's message wasn't fulfilled because there was no mark of the beast issued there. So you know it was imperfectly fulfilled, so it's going to be perfectly fulfilled in the future. So you have to have a third angel in the future. You've already got a second. You can see it in the word. Then you've got a third, because we're expecting a third. We have so much information. When the Sunday law happens, a loud cry is going to happen. We're going to be empowered. The earth is going to be, this great work's going to be done, and we're going to say, come out of her, my people.
So, just to clarify again, in 1989, the first angel's message was again starting to be preached.
First angel's message. I'm going to put arrive,
Okay.
and I'm going to put 1989.
When you're saying in 2001, the second angel's message was given.
I haven't said that yet. So let me just lay out what I have said.
And all of that is Revelation 18.
It's encompassed in
All of this, I've given you the verses 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
It's the fourth angel.
Here, Revelation 18, verses 1 to 4.
It's the fourth angel, but it's empowering
The
the
third.
third angel. So then why does it start from 1 to as well?
Well, if you're going to ask me that question, I'm going to ask you, why does it say Babylon is fallen if it's the third angel?
No, I'm only asking because I know that the fourth angel comes and empowers the third angel.
Okay.
The third angel was message, so then why? Or is it all